So I'd like to welcome Brian and Laurie to the stage. So thank you very much for coming along. We have roughly 133, 134, increasing. So we have more and more people joining the room, so this is fantastic. So Brian Hay, APM, has a rare blend of cybersecurity skills and business attributes. Well considered a thought leader in the world of cybersecurity. He learned his craft from non-technical demands of how the industry runs, but rather from focusing on the activities of crime and sort of criminals. It's a very different approach to myself, for example. And then we have Laurie as well. So Laurie's got a very long career in information security, around 30 years or so, and 16 years in counterterrorism. So I'm sure there'll be very, very interesting stories over a beer sometime. He was the security manager for the Blood Service at the time of the data breach that occurred in 2016 and has been involved in all aspects of the remediation activities that resulted from several security reviews in its aftermath, as well as developing a cybersecurity roadmap and strategy that continues to evolve. As we all know, cybersecurity is a evolving kind of beast, and I'm sure Laurie and Brian are doing a fantastic job at it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the next two speakers who will be talking on the Australian Red Cross Blood Service and the data breach that they suffered in 2016. So more of a case study. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you. Now, mate, do you realise that we are probably the oldest two people in AusCERT?
Yeah, and I beat you by about 10 years too, I think.
So we got probably nearly a century and a half between us. How tragic is that? Okay. So, we want to talk about the Australian Red Cross Blood Service data breach, now Australian Red Cross Lifeblood. And I think they were going to play a video for us at the beginning if the control console could activate that.
Firstly, can I thank you all very much for being here today. So why are we here? We are here to apologise to our valued donors for a data security issue. As an organisation, we are deeply disappointed to even be in the position of having to do this. On the 26th of October, we learnt that a file containing donor information, which was located on a development website, was left unsecured by a contracted third party who develops and maintains our website. The issue occurred due to human error. Consequently, this file was accessed by a person outside of our organisation. This was brought to our attention by AusCERT, our cybersecurity experts and advisors, who immediately shut down access to the file. As an organisation, we are still in the process of completing our investigation, and we have engaged forensic experts to help us with this. We are also taking guidance from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. The file was a backup of web-based inquiry forms that are submitted to donateblood.com.au and by people making appointments to give blood. It also included the names of our team groups who work together in the team donation programs. The backup file contained 550,000 people who completed a web form to access a donation between 2010 and 2016. The type of information included in these files include name, address, and personal details. Personal details that come about from completing our short questionnaire, which is a bit like a gateway to see whether people can go ahead to donate blood.
May 26th of September 2016, it all occurred. What was your position at this time with Red Cross?
I was the ICT Security Compliance Manager. Up until a month before, I'd been the single security bloke in the organisation. And we had one who may even be online today who joined shortly before the breach occurred, and the team's grown significantly since then for all sorts of reasons, but we'll get into that a little bit later on.
So what basically happened?
Well, as Shelley said, a vendor that was looking after our website was setting up a new UAT environment, and they took a copy of the database that was attached to those web forms, dropped it on a web-facing server rather than on the database server behind the firewall, excuse me.
You're right.
And it sat there untouched for 6 weeks until the day before, on the 25th of October. And look, I always say young bloke in the Netherlands, but I don't know whether it was a bloke or whether he's young or whether he's actually really in the Netherlands. But someone was scanning the World Wide Web for database files and stumbled across it. He then told, when he viewed what it was, realised it was Australian, and got in contact with Troy Hunt at the time to tell him about it. Troy then partially downloaded the file and found his own and his wife's name on it, who have both been blood donors, and then set about trying to contact us to tell us what had happened. My wife and I were building a new house, so we were in rental premises, and I couldn't plug the phone in beside the bed, so it was plugged into the PowerPoint in the ensuite.
I don't know if we should go into, you know, you and your wife being in bed. I'm not sure what the rating is for this.
I guess the point is, mate, I had lots of missed phone calls and messages on that Tuesday night, and Thomas King, who was with AusCERT at the time, was trying to contact me and wasn't able to until the following morning. So we played a bit of phone tag from about, I didn't try and call him at 5 o'clock in the morning. I waited until it was 7, which is an hour earlier up in your neck of the woods in Brisbane. And we eventually made contact at 9 o'clock on the Wednesday morning. So things kicked off in earnest then.
So I think it's pretty impressive to me that, you know, AusCERT had a role to play in this. But what I liked is the fact that if you sit back and think about it, is that the cybersecurity community is a global community that does look after each other, and it's about building that sort of ecosystem of trusted entities. And obviously AusCERT were part of that for you.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've obviously had a long-standing relationship with them. I don't know how Thomas did it, but he managed to get the IP range blocked on the Tuesday night. So we knew on the Wednesday morning that there was no further access able to be gained to the database at that stage. What we didn't know at the time was what it was. I mean, Shelley said 2 days later in the press conference that it was the web forms, but at the time all we knew was that there's something like 1.3, 1.4 million lines on the database of people. And it's that sort of sphincter moment at the time, because you think that someone's actually got or gained access into our network inside and taken stuff out. As it turned out, it wasn't that. But it took us probably an hour and a half to 2 hours to determine that was the case on the Wednesday morning.
So it all goes to crap. You've got a situation that, you know, you called it the sphincter moment. You've got to respond. You've got to isolate and contain. What were the first steps you put in place? How did the organisation, you and the organisation, sort of react to this news?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we knew that the database had been taken by at least one person at that stage, and partially by Troy as well. What we didn't know was whether it had gotten any further out. So, I mean, the first thing we did was set up a war room within the ICT division to start to work the problem and determine the forensics. It took us a little while to work out what had been taken to start with, and the nature of the information that was contained in the database. There was also our crisis management team set up a separate workroom, war room with the executive team to start working it from the other angles required. There's lots of liaison required with our stakeholders, the National Blood Authority, various health departments around the country, Australian Federal Police, etc., etc., etc. So, it's not just an ICT issue when these things happen. I know we say that all the time. It's a whole of organisation issue when you do have a breach, and you've got to respond as a whole of organisation. Lots of stuff around communications and things, and consideration as to if we go public with it, and there was never any thought that we wouldn't go public and tell people what had happened, but when and how was the best way to do that were all considerations. But mate, our one driving, I guess, tenet was that if if people lose trust in us as an organisation, people stop giving blood, and the consequences of that is that people die. So, we were very concerned about what impact it would have on the blood supply, and it was our driving.
So reputation management must have been a critical issue for you.
Huge. I said, people stop walking in the door. Consequence is that people die, and we needed to manage that properly as well. So, I sort of comment there that it was good to see an apology, and there was never any consideration given to the fact that we wouldn't go public with it. We're very conscious of that. We have a lot of goodwill across the entire community, and we wanted to maintain that as best we possibly could. But there was a fear that we didn't know how people would react.
So just to recap, you've got to respond to the situation. You notify all the senior members of the executive. You establish a war room. You're starting to build strategies around notifying stakeholders. You mentioned that you're starting to look at the forensics. You're still trying to ascertain, get all the information together to look at where you are, to then ascertain, I assume, where you want to go. Now, you didn't know the database, so I heard something that you actually had to start rebuilding the database so you could actually get some answers.
Yeah, we did. We didn't know where it had come from originally, and once we determined that it was that collection of web forms from the website, we then had to understand what personally identifiable information may have been collected in those forms, and therefore what was exposed. So look, as part of that, we had an independent risk assessment done by ID Care on the nature of the information. That assessment came back that there was low risk of future direct harm to people as a result of it. And that was largely because there might have been only one element associated with the web form. So basically, if you wanted to give blood, you could log onto the website at that stage, and you could run through the eligibility criteria, and then that would trigger an email off to our contact centre, and they would call you back. So some of the questions on those eligibility forms were, have you had sex with sex workers in the previous few months? Have you had a tattoo? Have you been unwell? What we found out when we reconstructed the database was that the order of those questions had changed over time. And therefore, if you'd said yes to the fact that you'd been unwell in the previous 2 weeks at one stage, it may have meant that it appeared that you were saying yes to having sex with sex workers, for example. Right. So when we rebuilt it, it looked like that latter question had a positive response rate of 98% or something ridiculous like that. So, it was just... But we had to understand that, we had to understand what people's details, details might have been released.
So you mentioned something before, and Shelley gave that press release and did an excellent job 2 days later. How important was it for you to take time to plan and prepare before executing that public-facing response?
It was huge. Shelley said, with 1.3 million lines of entries on the database, 550,000 unique identities, we had to tell everyone what was going on, and lots of the information in that database was stale. Some of it was up to sort of 8 to 10 years old. So, people had moved addresses or changed phone numbers or changed email addresses. So we had to determine who we were going to tell and how we were going to tell them. And the decision was made that all of our donors needed to be notified. And that's a huge exercise. So even sending out SMSs, which started as Shelley was giving the press conference and a limit of sort of 70,000 an hour, it took us the best part of 12 hours to get SMSs out to everyone.
Wow.
So we contacted everyone by SMS, those who we had mobile phone numbers for, and the rest where we had email addresses, and obviously went out through our social media to tell people as well.
Now, you and I both know from our past lives that when you have a major incident, the biggest pain in the neck is senior management constantly wanting to know what's going on and insisting upon sit reps or situation reports and the like. And I'm not saying that happened here, but I said in our past lives. And in time,
well, everyone who's ever done an exercise, mate, will know that that's an issue. But look, honestly,
how did you manage that though? How did you manage it? Because anyone out there that goes through a major incident, it knows you must expect that is going to happen. How did you manage it this time?
We had the two war rooms set up on separate floors, so there's a lot of going up and down stairs. There's only one floor between us, so it wasn't too bad. And it's a matter of defining your roles and responsibilities quite clearly right from the get-go. So you have gophers. You need a gopher to run between the two. You need to answer the questions as they come up. And you need to be able to give sit reps when they're required. So it was a matter of having those clearly defined roles. Look, we'd had numerous crisis management team exercises, not necessarily around cyber incidents, but those roles were clearly defined, and it worked really well. I don't think anyone. You don't necessarily have the answers at your fingertips every time a question's asked, sure. But you can go away and find them, and we made sure that there was that single point of contact between the rooms, rather than having different people answer questions at different times. So that's really important when you're trying to manage a crisis.
So communications is critical, right, in times of crises?
Yeah.
And if you reflect back now with a retrospective sort of view, were you comfortable that you managed the internal, external comms pretty well?
Yes, we were, and I guess that's been reflected in people using us as a sort of a best practice case study in terms of how to respond to a crisis. It's not to say that we didn't make changes along the way either, because I touched on that risk assessment we had done independently. We didn't want to do it internally. We got an independent person in or group to look at the potential impact of the release of the information. But even there, it became evident. So we had on the after Friday, so the communications team were managing social media. We had a number of scripts already written for people to give back, if people rang in with questions. But overnight on the Friday night, by the time we came back in on the Saturday morning, we had around about 3,000 inquiries that we had to respond to. So we had to go back to the drawing board there to understanding then what people's concerns were and the types of questions that were coming. We went back and recreated scripts so that our contact centre had stuff that they could tell people. It also became evident that whilst it was low risk information for many people, there are certain classes or cohorts of people for which that information is really critical. Law enforcement, defence force personnel, they don't want their addresses out in the public. So we had to then put a strategy in place where we could handle those people separately if required. And
these are the issues, of course. If you lose information in the data breach, you've got to think multiple ways. Well, whose information is it? What are those impacts on them as persons and as individuals? And of course, not just their organisations. Now, you must have been, and the team, everyone is going at critical mass, 1,000 miles an hour. The hours must have been long and arduous. How would you recommend what would your advice be to others that go through this scenario just to cope from a personal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, everyone wants to work the room. You don't want to go home and go to sleep. You want to see it through to the end. But obviously, there are long hours those first few days whilst we're trying to pull stuff together and understand how widely the data may have been released and who else had access to it. So they were long hours, but you've got to manage your team properly. You've got to make sure if someone's been there for 8 or 10 hours, tap them on the shoulder and say go home, and have someone else ready to step into their shoes. So that's really important, because fatigue over a number of days does set in. You don't make good decisions when you're fatigued. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right people on the floor that can make proper decisions and do the stuff that needs to be done without being too tired about it.
How did this affect staff morale?
Look, there wasn't a great effect on staff morale at all. I mean, one of the things that we were really wanted to make sure was that stuff didn't leak before we were ready to go public with it, and everyone across the 2 floors knew something was going on, but no one knew, other than those who were actually working the problem, knew what it was about. So I was really proud of everyone for that, for keeping it close to the chest, and that was a really important thing, because we didn't want to lose control of it either. We had to make sure that, given that our concerns about the blood supply, that we were able to release it at a time and with the right information to tell people to.
Sure. You're the security manager. You've just had an incident, and it's a lot of pressure. Did it ever go through your mind that your job could be on the line?
Oh, it does. Yeah. I mean, I've been sacked from a previous role, mate. So at the top of my game too, I might add, but that's another story for another day.
Look, that with the millions watching on it. Yeah.
You can Google me, you'll find out what it's about. Yes, it does. But it wasn't a real fear, and a real fear in the sense that my job was ever under any real threat. We had tremendous support, and not just me, but the entire team, from the executive and the board.
That's actually, if I could interrupt you on that point, and we only have 13 minutes left, so I'm going to belt you around the ears a little bit here.
It's gone quick.
So you just mentioned that you had great support by the executive management. Now, from a position where you're going forward to trying to get through strategies, budget, resources, did it change the attitude of executive management, sort of take cybersecurity a little bit more serious after this?
Well, look, we had a new chief executive and a new chairman of the board that had arrived within the previous 6 months, and there was already a greater focus on security. We had a budget, we had a security improvement program that was underway and had been going for a couple of years. This accelerated things enormously. We didn't have a team that could do everything that was needed to be done, so we had to ramp up quite significantly, and we had probably about an extra 20 people at a tight to actually start to do some of the things that were required to be done. Now, this was a third-party breach, but the board was very keen to ensure that everything we had in place internally was robust enough to protect us as much as we possibly can be protected. So there were a number of reviews that were started, and they commenced on the Monday after the event, where we had our internal auditors in to do a review of the incident itself and how we had handled that. And that was Ernst & Young. We had PwC come in and do a review of end-to-end review of security. So they looked at everything from policies and processes through to the tool sets we had, the bums we had on seats. And of course, the Privacy Commissioner also launched an investigation a month or so later. So
on that point, let's just, if we can, 30 seconds on it. How much of an impact was the Privacy Commissioner?
I guess the main impact was on the enforceable undertaking and what we needed to do to satisfy that. And we were criticised for 2 points. One was we kept information beyond its use by date. So those web forms, once the email had been triggered to the contact centre, there was no need to keep the information anymore. And the second part was on our vendor management, because this was a third-party breach, effectively. So we had to put things in place subsequent to that to make sure that we do regular information security assessments on the vendors that are managing stuff on our behalf.
In fear of isolating and annoying all the vendors, vendor management, how was it an advantage or a pain in the neck during this process? Did you have vendors saying, hey, listen, you've had a breach, we can help you, we've got this amazing product, it's actually going to do everything for you, it's going to increase your IQ, improve, the colour of your hair?
Of course.
Yeah,
of course. I mean, two parts. Firstly, we had tremendous support from Precedent, who were the company that were breached. They hid nothing from us. They gave us all the support we required to do the investigation and make sure that we knew what had happened. But yeah, I mean, the phone rings off the hook.
Yeah. But did you find that a little bit of offensive? Because hang on, I don't want to be annoyed with this. I've got a critical incident I've got to manage, and you're trying to sell me something?
No, I didn't, because we had to work our contacts anyway to get some of the stuff that we needed done. I mean, we didn't have forensic experts on staff, so I had to engage with someone who I had a previous relationship with to do the analysis of the web server and find out how many times it had been touched and who got hold of it. Which incidentally we haven't touched on, but there was only those two occasions. So it sat there for 6 months, 6 weeks without being touched at all, and then our friend in the Netherlands and Troy were the only two people that had actually downloaded.
And that would have been a hell of a relief once you established.
Yeah, it was absolutely. And whilst we took their word for that, we got an unknown person in the Netherlands telling us that he deleted the database. He saw himself as a bit of a white hat that wanted to build a bit of a reputation of his own as a good guy, and we then had to put in place some dark web monitoring to make sure that it didn't pop up elsewhere, unknown places. So, so again, stuff we didn't have on staff, we needed to be able to engage with people to do that.
So obviously intelligence and bringing that critical mass of the right information to us aid in the critical decision-making process was something that would have been so important to you at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we're taking people at their word to a degree. But you still need to be able to ensure that what they're telling you is right as much as possible. And you know what it's like. I mean, this data when it is taken has most value as soon as it's taken. So as it ages, it has less value. So if someone does exfiltrate information from anyone, they're going to want to get it on the dark market as soon as possible and sell it as soon as possible before it gets replicated and sent. The value decreases.
So, Laurie, we've got 8 minutes left, and I want to focus most of this time on lessons learned. What were some of the key lessons, reflecting back, going through that you would share or provide advice to our participants listening on this?
Obviously, you need support of your board and executive team, and that's critical. It has to be top-down support, and we were very lucky and still have that. Still doing quite a lot of investment into security across the board as well. Get control of your shadow IT, and we say that time and time again. We didn't know that database even existed. We'd previously had an on-staff webmaster who knew all that stuff. They were made redundant and weren't replaced a few years prior to the event. So we put controls in place now that we know where stuff flows out of the organisation, who's got hold of it. Review your cyber security or cyber incident response plans regularly and your crisis management plans. Exercise. You make mistakes in an exercise, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And another point to that, which we've talked about many times before, Brian, is you need to understand your threat environment as well. So you need to understand who may want to attack you and why, and what those attack vectors are, and then exercise appropriately with that in mind. Manage your vendors. We've got a situation in place now where we do biennial assessments of everyone who handles PII, or we bring that forward in the event that a contract's up for renewal, or there's been some incident associated with them or the industry they work in. So you've got to do that, and Privacy Commissioner expects that from everyone as well.
Yeah.
So as part of that, you need to know what the Privacy Commissioner says is reasonable steps in managing vendors and protecting that private information as well.
Could we extend that term managing vendors to, because I'm a big advocate of communities of trust and ecosystems of trust. So, and using that vendor network, because I've got access to the latest global intelligence, I've got incredible tools, skill sets such as forensics. You find bringing some of them in that you trust and actually make them part of the solution was critical to your success?
Yes, it was. Look, I think the environment in Australia has changed a lot in that 4 years as well. So the Australian Cybersecurity Centres and the Joint Cybersecurity Centres around the country now that have been set up are doing a great job in bringing people together. I think we've still got a long way to go in setting up those trusted information sharing networks. Some verticals do it better than others. The banks have been doing it for years and doing a really good job of it. Health is still way behind because there's a difference between public health institutions, big public hospitals and stuff like that, and the private health networks and things like that too. Lack of sharing information between them is still a problem in my view, but is getting better. And I think the federal government response to the latest strategy that they've put out does put a big focus on being able to share that intelligence and share that information. Nothing beats being able to pick up a phone and talk to someone about stuff.
Absolutely. How response ready was the business? When you reflect now compared to how you would be ready now, back then, how response ready was the business?
Look, I think we did pretty well. We are much better now, have much more capability in I guess having incidents flagged earlier. That sat there for 6 weeks without us knowing about it. If the guy in the Netherlands hadn't found it, we probably still could be sitting out there today. So,
how important is people and culture?
Oh, huge. If people don't understand where they're likely to get targeted, they're going to get targeted and stuff's going to leak out. They're going to click on bad links in emails. They're going to be phished. We've got a huge, as you well know, Brian, you're working with us on it. We've got a huge emphasis on being able to upskill our people in recognising threats when they occur now, and having the not so much the courage, but the desire to actually report them when they see bad stuff. So we've done a lot of work in that space. Still a lot more to do, but it has to be a huge focus for everyone.
Mate, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I want to just change course for a moment, and just, if someone wanted to ask a question at the end, that'd be great. But a very important question is, how are Australia's blood stocks holding up today?
Look, we're at our highest levels since about 2007, I think, even with COVID. And so, look, we've got a lot of great goodwill that we've built up over the years with our donors. And there's probably many of them in the room today as well. So it's really important that people still put their hand up and give blood. Lifeblood's business has changed enormously over the last few years as well. A huge emphasis on plasma collections now. Moved into milk banking and organ donation, and poo banking is coming up shortly. So keep your eye out for that.
What banking?
Gut microbiome.
Different,
yeah. Yeah. So
anyone out there who's never made a blood donation, please think about doing it and making that contribution to this Australian country.
Absolutely. Like with many organisations, with the supply chain issues now, we still import a bit of our plasma. We'd like to get to the stage where that's not necessary, and we're moving towards that. We've got discussions with government about how that might occur over the next few years. But look, we had a free kick with this data breach. We didn't see a drop off in blood supply. We don't want another one because we don't want to see it happen.
But tell me if it's true. I heard a rumour that you and the team and the executive at Australian Red Cross, now Lifeblood, did such an amazing job. You increased your donor numbers post the event.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. It's the same that happens with most natural disasters and stuff too. We do get an influx of people that want to put their hand up and give. I said our donor panel now is higher than it's been for more than a decade. So we're really grateful to everyone who is giving blood and continues to do that on a regular basis. So,
mate, just on behalf of the Queensland community, I can't be talking on behalf of Australia, being a parochial Maroon supporter, but thank you to Australian Red Cross Lifeblood for all the amazing work that you do. And I think people are alive, and you are saving lives. And having to work with you, I have been garnered a tremendous insight to how important it is. And I'd encourage everyone out there, if you have not been out there and made a contribution of your blood, please do so, because it is life-changing and it's life-saving. Mate, in the ever-growing complexity of cybercrime, and it's how it becomes more sophisticated with the driving of organised crime, nation-sponsored attacks, what you've shared with us today is the insight of how we need to be more resilient, how we need to build those trusted ecosystems, how we need to actually fully appreciate the threat of the attack, that it is real and it can happen accidentally, as it did with you, and forthright and honest and transparent in your response. And you know what? Australians have a great capacity to understand and forgive. And some of the lessons I took from you is, you know, that the third-party processing, understanding your partnership with the Privacy Commissioner and understanding what is required and how you can improve. So thank you so much for your time and the preparedness of Australian Red Cross Lifeblood to be full and frank here today and share it. So I'm going to hand over the last words to you to say if there is something you just want to tell the audience what they should do, that'd be great.
Well, look, the final thing is don't leave it till you have a breach to understand what resources you may require. So, you know, we don't all have people sitting around twiddling their thumbs waiting for these things to happen. So you need to build relationships with other organisations that you call on the event that something does go wrong and you need them, and do it early.
Well, thank you very much, Laurie. Really appreciate it. Hand over to you, Lucas.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian and Laurie. That was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed hearing a candid conversation around data breaches, and thank you very much for being so open and honest about some of the issues and some of the concerns that you had during it. There were a number of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time because we're going to move into lunch now. But I will kind of ask one question that kind of got the most upvotes. It was around having an IR plan or playbook covering this kind of scenario. Was that in place prior to the breach, and also is that in place potentially now as a result?
It is in place now. We've got playbooks around a number of different scenarios, you know, data breach, ransomware, phishing exercise, all sorts of things. So, but the key is understand your threats and make sure that your playbooks are up to date and change as required, because I think, you know, threats change all the time.
Absolutely. Right, so there were a few other questions. So Laurie, Brian, are you chaps going to be hanging around for a little bit around the foyer or around the virtual conference for the next couple of days?
We can do that, yeah, sure.
Fantastic. So for those of you that did have questions, please do get in touch with Laurie or Brian. I'd like to, on behalf of AusCERT and definitely myself, thank you very much for coming along. It was absolutely fantastic to hear that. And a person being on the blue team now, I definitely appreciate your position.
Thanks, Lucas.
Right,
thanks everyone.
And we're going to kick it off to a video from The Spence, as he will now be called. He's going to kind of take us into lunch. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day.